Yes.
So a round of applause, please, for DJ Paulette.
Yes. Yeah. Good evening.
It's not the evening yet.
Yeah. Nice. Like, good afternoon, good evening.
So what I want to start with is actually the beginning. I mean, you're actually from Manchester.
Yes.
So tell us about whereabouts you are from in Manchester and your roots in the city.
Yeah, I'm Manchester born and bred. I was born in Crumpsall, North Manchester General Hospital, which is in North Manchester, in between Prestwich and Whitefield. All of my family were brought up around the North Manchester area. Started off in North Manchester, and then when I was around 6, we moved to Fallowfield, and so I was educated around like Fallowfield. I went to Zavarian Sixth Form College. I went to the Hollies Grammar School in Didsbury, and then I went to Manchester Met to do my degree. So I've been kind of raised and educated in Manchester, and my clubbing life started when I was about 15.
But even before the clubbing life, because your mum was into music, wasn't she? Yeah, so you have a musical background.
Yeah, my mum's a singer. My mum did many things. She worked for the city council. She was like heavily into the unions. She was like one of the people who were instrumental in the equal ops department of Manchester City Council. She did a lot for women, people of colour. And then home life-wise, she was a jazz and cabaret singer. So we never.
She sounds aged.
We
not have her down here.
But she sang all over the place. You know, from the Talk of the North, Fagin's, all those little cabaret clubs. You know, Bernard Manning's club, and she sang with all the people like Fufu Lamar and that kind of thing. But also, my mum and dad were part owners for a while of a club in Manchester that isn't really made anything of, and they had it through the 60s, the late 60s, and it was called the Ebony Club, and it was on Deansgate, corner of Deansgate and Bridge Street, near the pub and near the press club. And it was the first club really that black people and people of colour could go to, and in the centre of Manchester, and enjoy music, live music, have a little bit of something to eat, have a bit of a social, and dress up, and were welcome in the city centre. Now, I've got to speak to my mum and find out exactly how long that lasted, but my mum's always been, and my family has always been musical and involved in some way, shape or form in Manchester's musical fabric. And for me, I started off my career really in terms of music, started off in radio before it started off in anything at all.
But even in home life, what was the music you would be listening to when you were like a teenager?
To everything. Like as a teenager, for me, I've moved through everything. My mum was into everyone from Mahalia Jackson, Ella Fitzgerald, Eartha Kitt. She loved Fats Domino. She loved Satchmo, which is Louis Armstrong. Up until Marvin Gaye, Aretha Franklin, Sarah Vaughan. My mum really, it was my mum that brought the music into the house, which is really, that's something that I kind of thought about only really recently, was that my mum was going to the record shops and buying the music to bring it in. Now, if you know anything about record shops through the years anyway, I mean, it's the real male bastion. It is not so much now, but in the early days, record shops weren't really the places where women frequented, and for my mum to build up this massive record collection for us all not to touch, which I did because I was naughty, but it's just like I wanted to play the music that my mum was listening to. So my mum was really the driving force behind the music in our house. But then I kind of switched it up a bit because I wanted to be different to my sisters and my brother. I've got 6 sisters and 1 brother. And they were all into everything from 60s music, Beatles, Herman's Hermits, you name it, to my brother was into funk, soul, Marvin Gaye, Al Green, disco, Rose Royce, you name it. My sister, they each had their own specialism, their own genre of music.
So you had to find your own little space.
And I found my own little space. And my little space was, and this is like the early 80s, so I was into Cabaret Voltaire, the Sheffield sound,
That's quite,
early
it's quite a jump.
League.
I mean, what's your route to there?
Because, it's a strange one, really, because my sister Elise was really into Bowie. And I remember her, I think I can't have been more than 7 years old when she bought the Aladdin Sane album, and she bought it first day out. And I was just mesmerised by the album cover. I was mesmerised by the music. And every time she went into the living room to listen to this album, I'd just sit with her. And I learned every lyric to Aladdin Sane when I was 7 years old. And they're not really lyrics that, some of them aren't really lyrics that 7-year-olds should be singing, and I knew that. But it was a fantastic album, and it is still one of my all-time top 10 favourite albums. And I treasure the vinyl because my sister gave me that album. Double album, gatefold sleeve, first edition Aladdin Sane album when she left home. And I still have that in my collection. And from that was the jump off for me, because I was into a lot of the stuff she was into. So Roxy music, David Bowie, T-Rex, all of a sudden that music kind of became more me than the funk, the soul, the northern soul that everybody else was listening to. I just seemed to listen to that more on repeat than everything else. So then I started going to clubs.
So which clubs would you going to Manchester at that time?
Pips.
Yeah,
Pips
of course.
in Manchester. And that was really, that set the tone and the standard for me, because there I was hearing Grace Jones, Ultravox, Roxy Music, David Bowie in one room, and then I was moving into the next room and I was hearing the Dead Kennedys, Killing Joke, Susie and the Banshees, Deutsche Amerikanische Frontschaft, and my mind was just expanding with this this new world of music that nobody else in my family was collecting and I was into. So then I became the weird one in my family. And I also became very often the only black person on those dance floors. But because everybody else was different, all my mates had like high Mohicans and coloured hair and chains and safety pins and ripped clothing and like painted on the back of the leather jackets. The day I painted on the back of my Holly's blazer the Bauhaus logo, the twins like, "Are you going to school like that?" And I went, "Yeah, I am." And she went, "You can fucking walk on your own." So I was just like, I knew that I wanted to be into this music that was different, and it was synthesized.
Because
it
you
was
also
electronic.
and a lot of that music you talk about there, that post-punk music. There's a lot of black music influence as well.
Absolutely. The Clash as well. Well, good God, you know.
All Bauhaus, disco,
Bauhaus,
funk,
the
dub, it's all in there. Yeah.
You know, even Killing Joke.
The world's heaviest funk band.
Absolute amazing bass lines. And, you know, there was funk and disco and soul and reggae influences in all of that. So there was... And because everyone was so different, it was okay to be who I was on that dance floor, because we were all different, so we were all okay with each other being there. There was no, you know, for that time, I didn't feel like I actually stood out on the dance floor, but it's only looking back at it where I'm like, you know,
But what about your black mates? Did they feel like it wasn't the sort of place they could go to? Was it?
I didn't. Now this will sound weird, but you have to. I mean, I was born in 1966. When by the time we got to Fallowfield, it was 1973. In the 70s, we were the only black family on our street. Myself and my twin were the only black students out of 850 people in our school. When I went to secondary school, when we went to the Hollies, we were the only black students out of 1,050 students in the school. So I didn't have many black school friends. I didn't have many school friends who were people of colour. And so it was never an issue of, are your black friends going to come with you? Because I didn't have any. You know, I had to actually make a point of going to places. I had to do that flip. I had to go to places to find the black. I had to go to places, and all of my sisters the same. We had to go to different places to find the black experience. And also politically, you have to remember, sort of through the end of the 70s, early 80s, we had the sus laws and the riots, which were kind of preventing black people and people of colour from coming into the centre anyway. So you didn't really see a lot of black people in nightclubs in the centre of Manchester anyway. We weren't really welcomed or allowed, and we stood to be stopped and searched a lot more than anyone else. So that's where you got a lot of the black music clubs were on the outskirts.
Like Reno's and
like
Moss
the
Side.
Reno, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Our experience was kept on the outskirts and not really in the centre. So by the time I started to DJ, you know, and I've just landed in the Haçienda, and in a queer spot as well. So
You weren't DJing first, though. You were singing.
No, I was singing before I was the DJ.
Yeah, so tell us a bit about that, like you singing and being in bands.
Yeah, I made a habit of getting fired.
Not deliberately.
Not deliberately, no. But I am very sort of, I like my cozies, right? So whenever we're rehearsing, whenever we're doing band rehearsals, I'm always in joggers, sweats, big XL T-shirts and dressed down. And then as soon as I got to, it's like, right, we've got these gigs coming up and now we're going to do the real performance. And obviously, the rehearsals, I'm still like, you know, comfies, cozies. And then we get to the gig and I just completely changed. Like, you know, here I am in like a little tight pencil skirt, loads of makeup and hair done. And people are like, oh, right. She's not really a backing singer, is she? And I get fired the day after the gig. It's just like, well,
because you'd be upstaging the singer.
Never upstage the bride. Never upstage the bride. And I have never learnt that lesson. It's just like, because I am the bride. Sorry, people.
And what kind of music were you doing at that point? Was it all different styles?
Oh, yeah. We were singing like lots of cover versions and our own songs. So Stevie Wonder cover versions, jazz funk cover versions and stuff like that. Yeah, my mum liked us.
Well, that's good, because she sounds like she knows her stuff.
It's always a good sign when my mum's tapping her toes.
So when did you first DJ? It wasn't Haçienda, there was stuff before, wasn't there?
No, I first DJ'd at the number 1 in Manchester, and that kind of came off the back of dancing on a podium first. I was like, in not very many clothes and dancing on Friday and Saturday nights at the number 1, and I made a progression because people kind of warmed to me and I became a bit of a face on the scene. And a friend of mine knew somebody who wanted to put a party on at the number 1, but she'd run out of money. She'd used all the money for the posters and the hire of the club and this kind of thing. And she'd run out of money and couldn't afford a proper name DJ. And my friend had told her that I had lots of records, which I'd been buying records since, probably 10 or 11. So I'd built up quite a sizable vinyl collection of all sorts of stuff, everything from, funk, early hip-hop, Beastie Boys, you name it, I had everything. And she asked me if I would DJ. And she offered me 30 quid to play from 9 o'clock till 2 in the morning. And in 1991, 30 quid was okay money, and I was a student, I was studying for my degree, and I said, why not? And then I went out and spent my grant, 150 quid grant for the term on vinyl, on records, because I didn't know how many records I was.
So you're running at a loss from the start.
Well, yeah. Well, was it a loss? Because 30 years later, here I am still DJing, and I've made it.
So you've never DJed before, so
no, and
so
I didn't even have any decks at home. Come on, I didn't like.
So you had to go from the audience to just learn it in real live time.
Yeah, I did. I learned how to DJ in real time in front of people who were dancing, who, if they didn't like the records that I was playing, would give me the baseball timeout. And I had to learn really quickly how to change the vibe, switch the record if people weren't enjoying it. And that doesn't mean necessarily that you are playing always to the gallery, you're playing to the room, but it means that I had to learn to read the room. And I don't even really know how or where that came from, because I'd never DJed before. My brother was a DJ, but I'd never watched him do it. And cousins of mine are DJs, but I'd never watched them DJ, and they'd never shown me how to do it. But I have been, like I say, I've been a clubber since I've been 15 years old. So I have danced on enough dance floors, and I have danced my ass off on enough dance floors to know what I wanted to hear as a set, to kind of get a vague idea of what it takes to soundtrack a night from beginning to end, from people coming in cold or wet from the rain, putting their coats on, to off their tits at 2 in the morning, what are you going to play? And that changes, and you start to read what people want and what stages they're at in the party, and what are you going to, which gene or which atom are you going to kind of vibrate that's going to flip them into the next stage and send them home singing.
So almost the key skill is reading the room.
Yeah. I would say, reading the room and selection. And I think a lot of people will, particularly with the technology now, they'll say, it has to be seamless. It has to be seamless. How dare you put anything out that isn't meticulous? And I say bollocks to that. Because if you make a seamless mix that is really boring, it is just a boring mix. No one is ever going to dance to a boring, perfect mix of music. But if you play a load of tracks that are going to make people lose their shit, it doesn't matter whether you crash a mix here or there. What they're going to remember is what they heard and the difference of what they heard and whether it resonated with them and whether it made them dance or not, whether it made them sweat, whether it made them sing along, whether it made them Shazam the track. You know, you can tell when a mix is working, and you can make a million mistakes, but if people are Shazamming your tracks, it doesn't matter the mistakes you make. The good that you've done is the selection. The selection for me and the energy is key.
So would you say actually you're more of a selector than a DJ, or a mixture of the two?
Well, I did actually learn to DJ. I'm not, don't get me wrong, I don't like people who crash mixes. But I can tolerate people crashing mixes if they play the good tracks. You know, if you get the music right, you can forgive a lot of the mistakes, I think. And I would say, yeah, I am. Selection is very much key to me. Yeah.
So you were doing the number one club, then you moved to the Haçienda.
Yeah.
So what? That's a different sort of atmosphere, different vibe.
Completely different. Yeah. And it was a queer party, and it was once a month. And
it was the Flesh Nights, wasn't it?
Yeah, the Flesh Night downstairs in the Haçienda. And I was downstairs. And a lot of people would say, oh, I didn't even know the Haçienda had a downstairs, because they never moved from the main floor. But yes, it did. Mm-hmm. And, on each night, I think John De Silva had the downstairs. He was in the Gay Traitor. For the Flesh Night, I was downstairs. I hosted that for 4.5 years. Every month. And, it was on every flyer.
It was often the better room. It was quirkier.
Yeah. It was better room, and also worse sound system, because it wasn't a bespoke sound system. So it was just in a big flight case on 2 wobbly bar tables with speakers that, like freestanding speakers that were plugged into the wall, that people invariably tripped over the plugs and plugged out the sound halfway through the night. I mean, it was completely guerrilla, and it was the biggest learning curve that I've ever had, because I've never DJ'd. I had never DJ'd before properly in a club until I got to the Haçienda, and then I did it every month.
So what did you have to learn there? Quick.
And to play all night. Long sets, they didn't really give me guests downstairs. I was in from the beginning till the end of the night most nights. So I really learned how to play long sets, keep the energy going, keep people kind of dancing all night, screaming, whatever, taking the tops off and just having a really, really good time. And I think also it kind of pushed me into that environment where I was hearing music all the time, and I was hearing new music all the time, and I wanted to refresh my music every month. So I started digging a lot more, and then...
So which directions were you going in?
And then my music started to change as the years went, and I kind of dropped the disco and I dropped the hip-hop, and I started playing like pure house sets. Mm-hmm. And so by the time I left the Haçienda by the time I left Manchester in 94, I was playing pretty much, I think it was probably an 80% house set. Mm-hmm. And by the time I got to the Zap Club, I'd just completely dropped the disco and the soul and all the house party vibes, and I was just cranking out a house set.
So what was it like like you say, you went to the clubs before, the only black woman in those clubs, those alternative clubs. What was it like in the DJ world, which is a very, at that time, probably, and still is actually, to a large extent, very male world, isn't it? Did that matter? Probably didn't matter. Maybe it did matter.
It didn't matter on the gay scene because I think this is one of the reasons why I am so indebted to queer culture anyway, and the queer scene in Manchester particularly. It's because they really embrace difference, and because we were all different, it was okay, and you didn't really notice that, you didn't feel like you stood out too much. But then when I started playing on this straight circuit and going to the straight clubs, I had to change the way I dressed. I had to tone down the look, and dress, cover myself up really, because I remember the first time, I can't remember which club it was, but I remember going and I was just in my flesh head. So I went in like a fluffy bikini, and I walked into this club which was totally straight, and you could hear a pin drop. It's like, oh, they don't do that here.
Wow, sounds like, what kind of club is that?
It was very straight, and it just taught me a lesson, really. It's like, maybe that kind of performance doesn't work for this kind of club. And then I started to realise that actually even women weren't behind the decks in these kind of clubs. And then I was realising that actually what I was doing was really special in a lot of ways, but also really different. And I started to feel, I think it was probably about 95, 96 when I started to feel that pressure of there aren't very many women doing this. And if you are doing this, you have to be really, really good. And then I was hearing like people saying things like, oh, you only get the gig because, your boyfriend works for the club or something like that. And it's like, no, actually, I'm getting the gig because I'm as good as anybody else here who's getting the gig. But then there was an awareness around 96, 97 when the superstar DJs started to kind of bubble up.
Was that detrimental for you?
Not necessarily detrimental, but it just meant that there was an uber class of DJs. A hierarchy started to kick in, and the competition got fiercer. It got harder. But I held my own, but yeah.
I mean, did it make any difference going to Brighton and then to Paris, which you went to afterwards?
Brighton kind of opened the floodgates for me for working everywhere else, because it was, one, the Zap Club was, again, like the Haçienda, it was a really mythical club. Carl Cox had the Friday night. I had the Saturday night. And it had a lot of respect from like Clubland, from London, all over the UK. So getting my own residency at the Zap Club was just like a bit of a ticket to DJing practically anywhere else. I've gone from the Haçienda, which is wow, to the Zap Club, which is wow. And the Zap Club opened the door for me to go to Heaven in London, to go to the Ministry of Sound. Those two things together kind of pushed me into, first of all, the national circuit of DJing in the UK, and then Heaven, Ministry of Sound, Haçienda put me on the international circuit. So then I started playing overseas, Paris, Italy, Switzerland, Germany, all over really. So
I mean, was Carl Cox encouraging at all? Or did you just never see him because he's on a different night?
Yeah. I never saw Carl. You know, it's a funny one, actually, because I used to go and listen to Carl Cox. Now, this is a funny one. I remember going to listen to Carl Cox at the Velvet Rooms, and there were like 50 people there. Mm-hmm. I remember hearing Carl Cox when there was nobody kind of following Carl Cox, and I followed him and watched him blow up, you know. And people will say the same about me. I remember hearing her when she played to absolutely nobody, and then by the time I got to Paris, I'm playing to 30,000 people. So, yeah. I never actually got to meet him, though, properly, you know, and hang out with him as a mate. Our circles were kind of different, and I kind of... Because I went to work for a record label as well, I went to work for Mercury Records, so I was working for Talking Loud. So I kind of settled in with the Giles Peterson crew of DJs, the Talking Loud crew of DJs. So it was, you know, there were lots of different cliques, and I was in a different clique.
Speaking of different cliques, when you got to Paris, how different was that from the UK?
Paris was amazing. Like, it was the thing I did that nobody thought I would last at. They were like, oh, she'll be back in 6 weeks. And I was there 10 years. And I didn't speak French when I got there. Nobody in my family speaks French. I haven't got any French relatives at all, but I've always just wanted to go, and I've always wanted to speak another language. So I pushed myself into... I mean, I'd been playing in Paris anyway through the Ministry of Sound. It kind of started around 2000, 2001, and I'd started playing at the Queen Club regularly. And because I was playing out there regularly and kept getting invited back, I was like, oh, you know, this is the place for me. And then I got there, and I remember having a meltdown 2 weeks after I'd moved, going, it's all in fucking French, because I couldn't speak French, and I had to open a bank account and change my passport and do all these things that you have to do when you move. You had to change my tax and everything, and it all had to be in French and in the French system. And I was like, whoa, I just thought you moved and, like, you know, they didn't even have Barclays Bank. You know, it's just like I had to change everything, my bank, everything. And I learned to speak French. I remember the first week I was in Paris, I was like, I'm going to learn French. So I bought Le Monde and Libération and all these really complicated papers and magazines. I'm like, I'm going to read them. And it took me a week to read the front page of Le Monde with a dictionary. And I was just like, I can't make sense of this. And one of my friends said, you're doing it all wrong. How did you learn to speak English when you were little? And I said, well, we use picture books. And he said, right, go and get some really trashy magazines that you know the stories, kind of, and you'll start to connect the words from that. And also listen to the radio. Just leave the radio on in the background in the day. It'll just be noise to start with, but you'll start to listen to it. So I taught myself. I mean, I lived also in an area where there were no English people at all.
So you had to talk.
So I had to speak French. I had to. There was just no way around it. If I went shopping at Franprix or I went shopping at the market, I had to do everything in French. And it started off in really bad French, and then it kind of built up. And I started DJing probably, I think, pretty much as soon as I got there, because I'd been playing for Queen anyway. They kept me on. And then that team moved to another club called Red Light, and they took me there. And then that team moved to another club called Mix, and they took me with them. So I just was immediately DJing. One of the first gigs I did, I played with David Guetta. I remember this, it was just mad. Like, watching this rock star come in, like rock star level DJ come in. And he played like Elvis and Michael Jackson. And he played like a really general set. David Guetta did not play straight house when he started. And when we DJ'd together, I was playing like house all night. And he started his set with an Elvis Presley track. I was like, what the fuck? So yeah, I'd kind of, because I was working straight away, I was touring France straight away. And again, I couldn't speak French, and I learnt to speak French by touring literally every department in France for 10 years. And I think the result of it was, towards the end of it, people would say, oh my God, she speaks like such a Parisian. And I'm like, really? I'm from Manchester. I'm not Parisian at all. I'm from Manchester.
So did you stop playing Elvis in the end, or
no,
did you
no,
kept it
no,
pure?
I was playing house. And I think the thing as well is that there weren't any headline female DJs playing house. There was like Chloe and Jennifer Cardini, and they were playing like minimal tech, and they were at the Rex Club, and they were, they were like the legendary DJs, but there was no female DJ playing house music like I was playing. So it was unusual, and there were no black female DJs doing what I was doing in Paris. So within a very short time of me getting there, I was playing with Bob Sinclair, Etienne de Crécy, David Guetta, Joachim Garraud, Martin Solveig. They were all, my name was on equal level with theirs on the flyers and at the parties. So I kind of went really, really quickly and stayed there for a very long time.
I mean, it's a real sweet spot there for the French kind of sort of house and post-house scenes.
It was then, yeah.
Did you know any of those people like Daft Punk or
no?
That's another different scene as well.
Yeah, it's a different scene. I mean, I got to know. In the end, I got to know like Busy P and the Ed Banger Records crew, but my music wasn't their music, like the Justice and the Daft Punk and all of that. They were kind of royalty, like heavy royalty, but more on the indie electro clash side of things. And I was like house vocal. My crew was, and it sounds kind of diva and knobby, but my crew was David Guetta, Joachim Garraud, Martin Solveig and Bob Sinclair.
Mm. What did the French like a different type of house music? Did they like it faster, slower, a little bit more jazzy, or?
Not really, because it was at that time, sort of 2004 onwards was just at that really crucial time when house music was about to change. And we've got the Swedish guys, the Swedish house mafia moving in. We've got the Dutch people like Laid Back Luke and Avicii and all those people like John Dahlback and Jesper Dahlback. We've got a lot of the European influences is just about to really rip the rule book up. So there was a lot going on, and the American influences were kind of coming out of it, although people like Eric Murillo's Subliminal, Strictly Rhythm, those labels were still happening. But the soulful side of it was coming out, the vocal and the money side of it was coming in. And it was a real sort of melting pot in one way and a powder keg in another. You knew that something was about to happen with the music that was going to just take it off into a whole other stratosphere. And I think that's when the big parties, the big players like your Fatboy Slim and David Guetta and all of those suddenly changed the game completely for club music and house music.
Is that one of the reasons you moved back to the UK and up to Manchester?
No, one of the reasons I moved back, because I went to live in Ibiza for 3 years, because I kind of got to a point in Paris where I kind of fallen out of love with the music that I was playing. And I wanted to change the music, and my agent wouldn't let me change my music. The radio station wouldn't let me change my set. And the club that I was playing at, the Queen Club, where I had my residency, were like, no, you play for the hookers in the VIP. And I'm like, no, I don't. We'll soon see about that. So I wrote a letter of resignation to each of them and actually sent it to the wrong people. Yeah. So the radio station got the club got the agent's letter, and they all got the wrong letters, so they all called each other and were like, what the fuck? And I went to live in Ibiza thinking, oh, well, I'm going to be this famous Ibiza DJ and my life is going to change. And it didn't. Well, it did change, but it didn't change in the way I wanted it to, because when I moved to Ibiza, I didn't really think it through properly, and I didn't set up my life, my professional life, in the way you should do it. I hadn't got any sort of network sorted, I hadn't got any work sorted, and I really didn't know how the club scene worked in Ibiza. And I think if I'd have understood that properly, I probably wouldn't have moved there.
A bit of prep is always important.
Yeah. Planning. Yeah. Planning is key. And also knowing the environment that you're going into. And I have come from DJing in Manchester and DJing all year round in Manchester, but all around Europe. And in London, the same, DJing all year round and all world, the world over while I was in London. Paris, the same, all year round, the world under. But I moved to Ibiza and I did not realise that you can only DJ there 3 months a year. Mm-hmm. So there are 9 months of the year that you are earning nothing. Like, it is closed. So if you haven't organised your work for those 3 months that you can work, that you are going to earn a year's wages in 3 months, you're in a bit of a mess. And that is what I hadn't understood. I hadn't looked at the financials of it, and I hadn't understood the environment properly. And I moved out there to live all year round. And I stayed there for 2.5 years, and it literally, financially, nearly killed me. Like, I'd spent all my savings. I didn't earn enough money. It is super expensive to live out there. The rent, in fact, here is a case in point. My rent, when I left Ibiza in 2015, was double what I'm paying now in 2025.
Wow. Yeah. So you're not going to move back there?
No. No. It's just simple things like that nobody ever explains to you, and that you don't think about checking these, the small print of it. But you've got to live, and it's one thing saying, you don't work to live. You don't live to work, you work to live.
Yeah, but there has to be something.
But there has to be. You have to earn something. You can't live off air. So my lesson in Ibiza was that you really do need to, plan things properly. And then my mum got sick, and I came back to Manchester really in the first instance to look after my mum. And I thought I was going to give up DJing because I was my mum's primary carer for 2 years, and she was really sick. We had a really traumatic 2 years with her, and she was in and out of ICU. But Freud says the repressed will always return. And, as much as I can think, I'm going to give up DJing. It's what I do. It's what I know. I do it really well. I love it. I will never stop loving it because it is just such a magical thing to do when you can entertain people for 1 hour, 2 hours, 7 hours with music and see the faces change and you can make friends for life. You know, I have made a lot of friends for life through nightclubs and that. So I got back into DJing.
I mean, what's interesting, the whole rest of your career was you finding work and getting work.
Yeah.
Then you stop and the work finds you.
Yeah. And certainly, I think the best thing, I think one of the best business decisions I have ever made in life, but most certainly in the last 10 years, has been to come back to Manchester and really find my people, find my tribe, whether that's in radio terms, finding people at Reform Radio. That was a key for me. Luca and Obama, the Electrics lot, Homo Electrics, that family. You know, I started off with them at the Refuge and then started playing for them at Homo Electric and various other parties. And then the bar scene. Now, in fact, that was one lesson that I learned in Ibiza, which actually stood me in good stead for working in Manchester. Because in Ibiza, the bar scene is only active, really, for 3 months. And I was playing long sets in bars, but I could only do it 3 months. And when I moved back to Manchester, the whole of the landscape of Manchester had changed. A lot of the clubs had gone, but there was a really healthy bar scene, and I could play in bars Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, every week, all year round, which is what I did. And I just saved loads of money, got my savings back, found a place to live, could support myself by playing in bars, which I just could not do in Ibiza because I could only do it 3 months a year, and the competition to get even 1 gig a month in Ibiza was so fierce because every second person in Ibiza was DJ. So I took the lessons of DJing in bars in Ibiza and brought it back to Manchester. And
shame you didn't bring the sunshine as well.